Whoever that man was that incensed me into this uncontrollable panic, he was now gone. Shame on you, Fernandez Augustine, I repeated to myself while making futile attempts to enthrall palpitation to subside. Shame on you. I mumbled, repeating that word. Mumbling turned into whistling that song by Magic Lanterns. Shame, shame. I whistled, acting calm and self-composed. I sang without knowing words, only to convert my mind to something else. I sang so others wouldn't notice me shaking. I climbed the stairs of my office building. 3 at a time. 3rd floor. The familiar smell of typography oils calmed me down. Safe heaven. Shame on you, Fernandez Augustine Navarro. Even now I question myself whether my journey to madness began on that day or was it underway for many years. Madness that creeps in and recedes in tidal waves. Is that how it usually happens? All I know is that an hour later I was laughing at my little moment of weaknesses. Preposterous and rubbish, my thick Andalusian twang spoke to me. The idea of being fully checked out by a specialist did cross my mind, and I immediately thought of Dr. Patel in Camden Town. He'd give me a comfortable medical diagnosis like a panic attack and prescribe some white pills, I thought. Little did I know that the day had more surprises in store. The unnerving script development continued in a more eerie fashion when my boss marched to my desk with a pack of printed paper. No, Navarro, you are not going to see Dr. Patel in Camden Town, who will make a judgment call on your insanity. Instead, you are going to do an article on Jorge Luis Borges' new book. He is making his presentation today at London Public Library and blah, blah, blah. I forgot about the panic attack. The thrill of seeing Master Borges again, 9 years later, was surreal. Moments later I was sitting in a cab on my way to the London Public Library, scribbling all possible questions I should be asking him. El Informe de Brody? Other books? Forget it. I knew very well what I would ask. I paid the cab and galloped up the marble stairs leading to the hallway, where the master was about to hold his new book presentation. I elbowed myself through the crowd of journalists to occupy the coveted front row spot. Quick inventory check, wallet, J-sack along with the omnipresent Swiss knife. Seconds ticked leisurely on my wristwatch. 4 more minutes. Forget this morning's sickness. Forget Dr. Patel. Collect yourself, Fernandez Augustine Navarro. That's your last name, isn't it? Yes. Yes, Senor Borges. But how do you? 9 years ago, in Cordoba, I told you we would meet again. Do you remember? I nodded rapidly, completely forgetting he couldn't see me. Stupid. Perhaps, continued Borges, it would be more prudent for us to speak privately after the conference. I invite you to have coffee with me. You like Colombian coffee, Mr. Navarro? I shall see you precisely at 6 o'clock at the address that my assistant will provide. His blind eyes were still affixed at the top far corner of the hallway, far above all the congested sharp-penciled critics and arduous followers of his divine writing. The attention was now all on me, as revealed by hundreds of photo flashes from behind. I thought of all the explaining that I would have to do tomorrow. How does Borges know you? Are you friends? You were raised in Cordova? Are you his illegitimate son? Back then I did not know. Answers came later. Memory is a tricky animal. As I gaze over the valley and satiate my lungs with familiar smells, I cannot think of anything specific. Vague and elusive memories of my childhood home. And these orchards, these white chapels and the old town itself, nothing but an incomprehensible sensation somewhere down there, below the chest cage. I close my eyes and let the sun twirl around with tinted specks of mosaic light. I am trying to focus without looking. Alas, nothing comes to mind. I've been robbed of my memory. You. I cast my eyes at the trail again. He is closing in. It's hard for him to walk upward, and yet I see that determination in his eyes, in his tight grip of that wobbly walking stick, in the way he periodically stops to catch his breath and eyeball the remaining distance. I am not going anywhere. 5? 10 more minutes? Come and take me, old man. If you can. I almost see his facial expression under the heavily pronounced frontal lobe. It's a grin. It's an expression that says, we shall see. Once I read an interview in the Morning Times. In it, Borges was portrayed as extremely humble and minimalistic. His house was depicted as a perfectly organized space with easy access to everything. Books on the shelves, judging from the admiration of the columnist, there were lots of them, were organized by theme and by title. Dictionaries and encyclopedias were grouped together on the same rack, so he could find them easily. In another article, dated 1966, I read that when Borges travels, and those travels were quite extensive, he carries a whole rack of books along, some of which may not even be read. When I entered his hotel room, that very book rack was the first thing that caught my eye. I stood perplexed at the multitude of titles, most unknown to me, when I heard the door swing wide open, and there he was entering through the doorway with a leisurely swinging cane. "Ah, Senor Navarro, how kind of you to visit this old man." I took a step towards him and produced some gibberish like "pleasure is all but mine." He half smiled and pointed his hand to the chair. "I know you will quite enjoy the taste of Colombian dark roast." Borges sat down and leaned slightly backwards, without releasing his cane. "Do you know the biggest advantage of being blind?" he asked and answered immediately. "Blind don't need light, so my utility bills are way lower." He laughed at his own joke only to be interrupted by his assistant carrying a tray of aromatic coffee poured in 2 small porcelain cups. Amazing how the very idea of drinking coffee instantly changes your mood before you even take your first sip. As I was readying to go on a pre-scripted monologue of expressing my gratitude and honor, Borges jumped right into the action. "I will get right to it, Senor Navarro. About you being here and about me remembering you. I know you have many questions. I will attempt to answer some. Some, but not all. When you leave this hotel, there will still be some questions that you will have to find answers to. On your own." He gently picked his cup of coffee and with hands somewhat shaking, took an artistic sip. Yes, I had questions. So many that my brain membranes were buzzing in bewilderment and disbelief. Here I was, sitting in the room with one of the greatest writers, who happened to mysteriously know my name and... "Have you by any chance read the Book of Imaginary Beings?" asked Borges. "I have. Many times. I read it in Spanish, when it just came out. Very recently I bought the English translation in some shabby bookstore off Oxford Circus. I read that book far too many times, but never in its entirety, mostly starting on a random page. Just as Borges had intended it to be consumed by his readers. You see, Senor Navarro, that book was, and perhaps still is, a never-ending work in progress as human imagination has no boundaries. I have included what I had researched over 10 years ago, then recently expanded and republished with more figments of collective human imagination. But the book is merely a small subset. In a way, the book writes itself. In some form, it's a labyrinth, an endless one, a living one, where every corridor and every room is never the same. What I had always wanted is the book to reflect the labyrinth in our collective subconsciousness, the force that drives our minds to craft. For that reason, all the creatures in my book are strictly fictional. Mythical. Am I not boring you? Not at all. I understand, Senor Borges. He nodded and wiped a coffee grind off his nose. That book, as its title implies, is all about imaginary beings. Tales, legends, folklore. But one thing that no one knows is that I had originally intended this book to include one more being. A being that goes by its Latin name Quietus Est. It appeared and disappeared across many cultures, sometimes centuries apart. Very little is known of it, but what I found was indeed astonishing. First, this being is physically no different than an ordinary human. You may say, it is human in many ways. As I studied this entity, I became more and more agitated. I could not stop. Like a madman, I was trying to learn more and more, but very soon the excitement turned into another feeling. Fear. Fear of what, Senor Borges? Borges' eyesight shifted from the corner of the room straight on me, as if he could perfectly see me. Fear of what I had uncovered. That Quietus Est is not a myth at all. He attempted to take another sip, but his hands started shaking, so he had to put the cup down, spilling some of it on the saucer and around the table. Pardon me, young man, I am trying to maintain composure. But you have not tried the coffee, he said, wiping his mouth and forehead with a knitted handkerchief. I raised the small cup and took a sip, disregarding the aromatic fumes of Colombian beans drifting down my internal gorges. Pardon me, sir, but you are saying that the imaginary being called Quietus Est was not imaginary. Is that why you decided not to include him in your book of imaginary beings? Only in part. Fear came from the realization of what it would mean for mankind to know about its existence.